I hate to say it because everybody's all euphoric right now under the current political situation, but I do believe, economically speaking, the United States is still heading for the cliff. I believe we're basically putting our foot on the accelerator as we head toward the cliff. This spending bill is hard to believe right now. We've got Republicans in the White House and both houses of Congress, and somehow we're still adding trillions to the deficit. Somehow we're still spending trillions of dollars on unconstitutional programs. None of the excellent executive orders that have come from the president are being enshrined into law, as far as I can tell. There are other mines, poison pills in this legislation.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Alex Newman. Alex is an award-winning international journalist, educator, author, speaker, investor, a nationally syndicated radio host, and founder of Liberty Sentinel. Alex, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Christian.
We'd love to start with asking you what's your current macro take, both here in the U.S. and perhaps abroad.
I hate to say it because everybody's all euphoric right now under the current political situation, but I do believe, economically speaking, the United States is still heading for the cliff. I believe we're basically putting our foot on the accelerator as we head toward the cliff. Spending bill is hard to believe right now. We've got Republicans in the White House and both houses of Congress, and somehow we're still adding trillions to the deficit. Somehow we're still spending trillions of dollars on unconstitutional programs. None of the excellent executive orders that have come from the president are being enshrined into law, as far as I can tell. There are other mines, poison pills in this legislation, and so what that shows me is that the folks in Washington, D.C. are not serious about getting the spending under control. They're not serious about stopping the crazy money printing that we've seen. I noticed the Federal Reserve is back buying tens of billions of dollars worth of bonds again. I guess hoping nobody will notice. I'm not really sure. But unfortunately, I think this is going to lead to disaster. It's a question of when, not if we don't turn this around. And it looks to me like this may be one of the last opportunities to turn it around. And it doesn't seem like anybody is serious about taking that, except for maybe a handful of lawmakers who are being targeted and demonized right now. So the big picture on the financial and the economic side, to me, does not look very bright right now. Maybe it's not as bad as under the Democrats, you might say, but to me, it looks pretty bad.
And then any comments as far as events that you're perhaps following over in, whether it's with Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, China, anything that you in that realm that you care to expand upon?
Well, I think we're seeing an effort to have at least one of these conflagrations become something akin to World War III. I think there are very powerful forces that have a vested interest in perpetuating not just war, but mega war, the kind of war that is life-altering for billions of people. And I think for a lot of the players behind the scenes, it doesn't really matter if it's Ukraine, Russia, if it's the Jews and the Arabs, if it's China and Taiwan, if it's India and Pakistan. It really doesn't matter as long as a lot of people die. And it serves as a catalyst for accelerating the undermining of the nation state, the fundamental transformation of society. So I do get the impression that Trump wants to be a peacemaker here. He has been very adamant about his desire to see peace. But what we're seeing, as far as I'm concerned, from the Russians and from the Ukrainians and from the Europeans, is a desire to actually drag this on, to expand the war. Frankly, I think it's very, very dangerous. But we've known for generations that these evildoers that I like to refer to as the deep state, just because it's a term in common usage today, they understand that war, from their perspective, is very beneficial. And not just because they're selling a bunch of weapons and giving everybody in debt. If you go back to the early 1960s, when the State Department commissioned this really significant report on a world effectively controlled by the United Nations, they identified back then that war and the threat of war were the fastest catalysts for undermining national sovereignty and merging governance into the regional and then the global level. So I think that is very concerning to me. It looks like they're setting us up for a World War III. And frankly, considering the economic position of the United States right now, considering where the military is at now after the the massive purges of loyal leadership under Barack Obama, the decimation of our military under Joe Biden. Frankly, I'm not sure we would win another major war. So I am very concerned about all of these things, obviously hoping for the best. But I think if we look at this situation realistically, we've got to see that this is not looking good.
Yeah, you reminded me. I got out about 6 years ago from the Navy, and one of the guys I worked under, he told me, he said, if you were only aware, Christian, of overseas, the nature of how these other forces are and such compared to what you see, and in being and seeing in the military and seeing its problems, you're like, oh my gosh. So yeah, that's spooky.
Yeah, it is. And if you talk to people who have recently left the military, or people who understand what's going on, and then you talk to people who know what the Chinese are doing, who know what the Russians are doing, you realize that this is not looking good. They've got they've basically taken all of our technology, sometimes with the help of our leadership, and that was the one big edge we had. Right, we didn't have the huge population numbers, but we had lots of money that we could pour into this, and we had lots of technology that supposedly wasn't available to our adversaries. That situation has now changed. Now they've got all of our troops heavily vaxxed, and they've got them, debating about transgenderism and Black Lives Matter and the critical race nonsense, focusing on climate change as if this were, and Trump is, of course, to his credit, trying to reverse some of this, but the damage that has been done, the fact that we hardly produce ships anymore, the fact that our technology is rapidly becoming outdated, the fact that we can't keep our Air Force jets in the sky without components made by the communist Chinese. You just look at this picture objectively. You just do an objective assessment here, and this is not looking good. And I don't say that to scare people. I say it because we need to understand this if we're going to fix it.
So what could you unpack what that solution might be, and then also, what is most likely to happen? I guess I know you don't have a crystal ball.
Well, I think Trump is trying hard on a lot of these fronts, and I've been relieved to see that. He's got the border under control. First step is, stop the bleeding, and then we worry about, dealing with the problem. But first step is stop the bleeding, and they've done that. They've got the border interactions down at like 95% from when Trump took over. So that's very good. That's a very good first step. Now we got to deal with all the hostile agents, enemy operatives that are crawling all over our country. We've got to rebuild the military, and I have a lot of confidence in Pete Hegseth. I think he wants to do the right thing. The question, and Donald Trump as well, the question is, can they, in the amount of time that we have? I don't think Congress is being very helpful. I mean, I'm glad they're spending a lot of money on this, but spending money and actually improving the military are two totally different things, right? If all this money gets diverted into the pockets of Lockheed Martin and the other contractors, that's not necessarily going to help us. One of the things that Trump is doing that I think is very important is trying to hit the brakes on this deliberate policy that the U.S. government has pursued under Republicans and Democrats, by the way, going back decades, of building up communist China, building up their industry, building up their military, building up their financial position, trying to rein that in a little bit. And I think that is absolutely critical. Better to do it now than when it's too late, for sure. Even now it's a gamble, but better to take that fight now. But if we don't deal with the money side of this, all the military solutions in the world aren't going to make a difference. If the dollar loses its status as the global reserve currency suddenly and unexpectedly, it's going to be cataclysmic for the American consumer, for the American government. If you look at the amount of debt that these people owe, that they claim that we owe, you can't even process these numbers. I mean, we're talking $40 trillion, hundreds of trillions in unfunded liabilities. They don't have that money, quite simply. And so we're in a very, very precarious situation. I would say the two main things, if we're going to actually sort this out, and I don't think these are things that people usually think about when they're trying to look at the situation we're in and how to get out of it, but the two main things that we must deal with that unfortunately are not being dealt with in a very significant way, at least right now, is the indoctrination and the dumbing down of our children, which is something that I've dedicated the last 15 years of my life to highlighting. If we don't deal with that, everything else is just a distraction. Everything else is just a stopgap measure to try to push the can a little bit further down the road. But over the long term, we will lose on every issue every time if we don't get this under control. If they succeed in brainwashing 85% of the next generation, it's just a numbers game. Just a waiting game. All they got to do is sit back and wait, and they will have us right where they want us. So we've got to deal with that. We've got to stop this indoctrination and the dumbing down, the sexualization of our children. And we've got to do it like yesterday. And the other issue that we have to deal with is on the financial side, the monetary policy. We have a private cartel of mega banks masquerading as a federal agency that is essentially running printing presses day and night. I mean, not literal printing presses. They're mostly just typing the numbers into a computer, but they're destroying the purchasing power of the dollar. They're enabling this crazy spending out of Washington, D.C., and they are setting up the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar for a catastrophe. So just earlier today, I left a meeting with our governor here in Florida. He signed a new bill into law today that would allow Floridians, at least, to use gold and silver in payment of debts. It's going to make it legal tender. It's going to make it transactional. So I think these are some of the kind of in-between measures that we can take to try to protect us from the worst of it. But over the long term, if we don't deal with the problem of the Federal Reserve having a monopoly on currency and credit, if we don't deal with what's happening to our children in the public schools, everything else that we talk about is just window dressing.
And as it relates to the Federal Reserve and such, you always hear people talk about the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements as well, and these other entities, Davos. Could you unpack perhaps some of your thoughts and maybe recent observations as it relates to that cohort, if you will?
Yeah, so about 15 years ago, I did a cover story in the New American Magazine about the emerging global currency. It was called Waking Up to a World Currency. And then we had a piece in there, a companion piece called The Emerging Global Fed. And what we showed there, and this wasn't like speculation, it wasn't connecting the dots, I wasn't going into the smoky rooms and listening in like a fly on the wall. I had their documents, I had their speeches. They were openly talking about moving away from the dollar and moving toward a one world central banking system that would be controlled and run by the International Monetary Fund. They talked about using special drawing rights, kind of a proto-global currency, as the new international reserve asset for the global financial architecture. And then the Bank for International Settlements is a critical part of this whole picture. Right? You go back and you listen to Carol Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor, history professor at Georgetown University, who, by the way, agreed with this push for a one world system. His big difference of opinion, he said, was that he wanted these people to be known. They wanted to be secret. And so what he said was the Bank for International Settlements is the apex of the global, he described it basically as neo-feudalism, of the global neo-feudalist system that they're building. And so what the Bank for International Settlements is doing in this process, in addition to supporting what I just described with the International Monetary Fund, the move toward an international currency, they are building the digital infrastructure to fundamentally transform everything about the economy. And they're doing this in the open, right? They're right now building, they say, international blockchain ledger that will be interoperable with all the national systems, that will include central bank digital currencies, which, by the way, they say like 98% of the governments and central banks in the world are working on these CBDCs. In the United States, Donald Trump, of course, put that on pause, but they're just finding new ways to kind of make the cryptocurrencies into de facto CBDCs with all the KYCs and everything else. And so the Bank for International Settlements is building this architecture whereby they want to tokenize every single asset and resource in the known universe, put it on this international blockchain ledger. Every tree, every farm, every car, every toothbrush, everything, so that you can only buy or sell and interact with this international blockchain ledger using your biometric digital ID and your digital currency. And that's the direction they're moving in. Now, they won't be able to get that overnight, but what they plan to do, we know because we've studied this very carefully, is they are hoping to use a crisis to make this happen. And whether that's the great taking that the great David Webb has exposed, whether that's some other sort of crisis, a collapse of the dollar, a collapse of multiple markets at the same time, real estate, stock, whatever. It doesn't matter which way the thing falls. The point is they will use this crisis, they will seize on this crisis to loot humanity, to crush what's left of the middle class in the United States and the Western world, and then to usher in this new system as the supposed solution to the problem that they created in the first place. So we're in grave danger right now. And again, I don't say that to scare people. It's much better to be well informed on these things so you can make sensible decisions than to be caught off guard. But that's what they're doing at the international level, and you can take it to the bank.
And as far as which I surmise would be like false flag events and things of that nature, could you unpack or speculate which maybe few would be the most likely scenario?
Well, the World Economic Forum started talking a few years ago about the possibility of what they referred to as a polycrisis, which is interesting. I heard that term even a year or two before that from Patrick Wood. He talked about the polycrisis of doom, where they would have multiple crises all merging into one mega crisis. And so if you look at the war game scenarios that they have been planning for, you've got cyber pandemic as Klaus Schwab, former head of the World Economic Forum, put it. You've got the possibility of this financial panic at the same time. You've got the possibility of a third world war breaking out. You've got the possibility of a cataclysmic financial implosion, and whether that be the collapse of the dollar, whether that be again the collapse of the real estate or the stock market, or both simultaneously. You merge those two things with all these other possible problems, maybe even throw in another pandemic or plandemic for a good measure. All of that coinciding into one hyper terrorizing event where everybody would just beg the people in power to save them from this. I think we got a sneak preview of it during COVID. I think if they can get their way, we'll see that on steroids, right? It won't be just a pandemic that you need to be scared about. It'll be a pandemic plus an economic collapse, plus a third world war, plus maybe some environmental catastrophe, plus maybe something in outer space. They've been talking about outer space stuff for all these years. And you merged all that into one crisis that will terrify virtually everybody in the world to the point where they will beg for these solutions. And, the specifics, I think, are less important. Will they blow something up in the United States and blame some other government? Maybe. Could it have actually been that other government? Sure. Could it have been a false flag? Absolutely. Right. Could it be something blamed on Donald Trump supporters? Sure. I don't think we can know the details of what it will look like, but the big picture has been very clear. You can go back 200 years and read the great Frederick Bastiat, the French lawmaker and philosopher, the author of The Law. He talked about tyrants even back then, right, centuries ago, concocting the poison and the antidote in the same laboratory. I mean, we're dealing with the same strategy today. These evildoers will unleash a crisis or multiple crises on us, and then they will pose as the saviors to protect us from the alleged crisis, which could be real or imagined, that they have unleashed on us.
And as it relates to, I might be kind of hopping around here, but as it relates to just kind of what's going on in the world, I saw that you've been digging into the events going on in South Africa and things of that nature. Could you share, for those of us who are not privy to all the ins and outs, but just kind of any comments that you have?
Sure, happy to do it. I used to live in South Africa, and I've got a special place in my heart for South Africa and the peoples of South Africa. And I often point to South Africa because what's happening there is a microcosm of what they're planning to do to us at the international level. Just think of South Africa. You've got all these different nations in this area, and they're vastly different, right? The Dutch settlers who started arriving there in the mid-1600s, these were Christians, these were capitalists. These people came from probably one of the most highly developed societies in the world at that time, thanks largely to the biblical foundations, the Reformation, the spread of biblical thinking. And then they arrived down there and they found these nomadic people who in many cases were eating each other, right? Nowhere in the region had anybody come up with a writing system, a wheel, a two-story building. And so you have these drastically different nations. You've got the Zulu kingdom. You've got the Xhosa kingdom. You've got the Khoisan that they found on the Western Cape. Radically different peoples with radically different backgrounds, different languages, different religious traditions, different ideas about how the world works. And what happened in South Africa was in the aftermath, and I should be clear here, the British Empire really got this process started, right? The British Empire, they went to war with the Afrikaners, the descendants of the Dutch, and basically absorbed this landmass with all of its different people groups into the British Empire, kind of setting the stage for apartheid. And then eventually what's happening now, which is all these nations have been stripped of their ability to govern themselves, and they've all been amalgamated under a unitary, communist, racist, totalitarian regime that is now entering the second phase of the revolution, which is the phase where we take all your stuff and kill you if you get in the way, right? And so think of the Afrikaners, right? And again, these are Western peoples, Christian peoples who come from Europe, same place as most of our ancestors here in America, who have now been forced into this amalgamated, unitary, all-powerful state where they don't want them to own their own land anymore. They want to. They call it expropriation without compensation, which is just a fancy way of saying we're going to steal your stuff and not give you anything. They're murdering them. They're singing songs, bring me my machine gun. We're going to murder all the farmers and this kind of kookiness. And they don't even want them to have their own schools and their own language anymore, right? They're trying to completely and utterly eliminate this people group off the face of the earth, whether through massacres, whether through taking all their stuff, whether through forcing their children not to learn their language and their cultural heritage. That's the plan for the whole world. Right? Imagine all the nations of the world amalgamated under a totalitarian global superstate along the lines of communist China. And by the way, the South African regime says the guiding lodestar of its struggle is communist China. Okay, so this is more than just a hypothetical. The South African government openly says the guiding lodestar of their struggle is the communist Chinese model. So imagine this model at the international level, where America becomes just one people group among dozens, hundreds in this one world totalitarian system, where we lose the ability to protect our rights, we lose our sovereignty, we lose our constitution. They can take whatever they want. We had a democratic vote, and the Parliament of Humanity, as they've started calling the General Assembly, has decided that it's unfair that Americans own so much farmland. It's unfair that Americans have nice retirement accounts when everybody else is poor. So we've determined that we're going to be expropriating your stuff without compensation. And we say, hey, we object. They say, oh, sorry, we had a vote, and tough luck, right? That's the model they're planning to use for the world. And once you understand that, what's happening in South Africa takes on much, much greater significance. It's not just some isolated issue on the tip of a continent that people don't spend much time thinking about. This is the model that they're planning to use on you. And by the way, that's not speculation. Barack Obama, if you read his own writings, if you listen to his own speeches, he will openly tell you he got involved in politics because of South Africa. He's following the South Africa model for the world. That's why they wanted the borders wide open. That's why all the artificial racial divisions that have been injected into our society over the last few years. It's the same model. They haven't quite gotten to the terrorist phase yet, where they've tried back in the 1970s, to be clear. Bill Ayers, the guy who got Barack Obama involved in politics, him and his little buddies bombed the State Department, the Capitol, the Pentagon, and murdered police officers. So I believe they will try that again if and when the time comes, as a means to an end. And so what's happening in South Africa, folks, has a direct bearing on your life. I don't care where you're listening to us from. This is going to have a direct impact on your life. And so I, for one, am very grateful that Donald Trump highlighted this to the world. I did my first major article on this situation in 2012. It was a cover story about South Africa called "Genocide and Communism Threaten South Africa." And, I hate to say I told you so, but this should have been very obvious even back then. Better late than never. Again, glad Donald Trump called this out from the Oval Office the other day, but we all need to pay attention to what's happening there.
What are some other things that perhaps keep you up at night or don't receive the light of day, if you will, from just the general population, whether that's national or abroad in nature?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to be concerned about. Ultimately, I don't stress about it or worry about it too much. My faith is in the Lord, and so the world could go to hell, and I'd rather it not. But if that's what happens, that's all right. But I do think that people need to pay really close attention to what's happening to their children. What is happening in the public school system today, if you want to call it that, it's almost a misnomer, is child abuse writ large, institutionalized, paid for by taxpayers. Your children are being brainwashed into false religions from the pit of hell. Your children are being dumbed down to the point where the government itself admits less than 1 in 3 of them are even proficient in any core subject. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of those issues that if we don't take care of this, everything else is for nothing. Maybe you can hold them back from taking your guns for another 20 years. Maybe you can keep free speech for another 10 or 20 years. But over the long term, you will lose all of that. Guaranteed, 100% for sure, because they got the minds of your kids. So I believe one of the most important things people can do and should do is protect their children from this indoctrination. A lot of different ways to do that. I would say pull them out of the school system right now. We chose to homeschool. We do classical conversations, and we do a homeschool co-op. We do a lot of different programs and resources that we're involved with. There's a lot of great private schools out there, a lot of bad ones, so watch out. But I think there's very few things more important right now for the average person than getting their children out of this system while there's still time, while we still have the freedom to do that, and making sure their kids get a good education where they're not just going to learn how to read, write, and do math, which they're not learning in the government schools, but where they're going to learn how to think, where they're going to learn how to reason, where they're going to learn how to sustain the institutions of liberty and civilization that our forefathers built up over hundreds of years, often at a cost of their lives. So I do think that's the most critical issue, Christian.
And obviously, this is germane to the American population and such, and kids. In your travels, I know you've traveled extensively. Have you observed that it's better, perhaps in certain other countries, or they're in the same boat, so to speak?
Unfortunately, the U.S. is the last real man standing. I mean, I've lived in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. I've probably been to well over 100 countries in my life. Um, if America falls, it's all over for freedom, for civilization. There's nowhere else to run, right? Because, well, I'll go to Switzerland, I'll go to Chile. Give me a break, right? I mean, it'd be nice to do that, but if the United States falls, freedom in those places and nowhere else is going to survive. So America really is the last man standing, at least the last one with the possibility of arresting the progress of this evil. If America goes down, it will be very tough for liberty to recover, even in the long term, right? Certainly not in the near term or the medium term. So I think for the folks in America, if you think you're going to run somewhere else and hide, you're kidding yourself, right? Costa Rica, give me a break. Argentina, give me a break, right? Yeah, they got Javier Milei. That's great. But there will be no running from this, right? There will be no hiding from this with AI and drones. And I mean, there is no escape from this. Either we stop the totalitarians in America, or freedom is almost certainly going to die absent some sort of miracle or divine intervention. So I think it's critical that people not look for escapes. And by that, I don't mean like, don't try to invest wisely, try to protect your family and stuff as best you can. But ultimately, there is no place where you're going to be able, I think, to flee to from the coming global tyranny that they want to impose on us. Some places are better than others, right? Florida is relatively free compared to New York, Illinois, California, Wyoming, Idaho. They're relatively free relative to those other places. But, we have Trump for a few more years, and hopefully that'll be a nice little reprieve from the madness. But I believe it could come back in at any moment. Europe is essentially gone. And I say that with a heavy heart. I've lived all over Europe. I truly appreciate what Europe has contributed to the world over the years. But it's essentially a dead man walking now. And so we've got to save the United States if we're going to protect freedom and civilization over the long term.
Yeah, I know we only have so much time, of course, but wanted to mention, because you mentioned about, of course, we've talked about Trump. How likely is he able to effectuate the things that he wants to achieve during this time that he has?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, he's already accomplished a lot. We've got to give him credit, despite how much opposition, despite how much pressure, despite the enormous number of attacks now going back almost 8 years. He's been able to accomplish a lot. But one of the big problems is that so much of this has been done by executive branch policy. That's not sustainable over the long term. If these things aren't enshrined into federal law, the next time we get a Joe Biden, the next time we get Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, or take your pick. They've got a long list of these people. All of that will be undone on day one. And maybe it won't be 2028. Maybe it'll be 2032. Maybe it won't even be 2032. Maybe we'll be really good and we'll be pushing back to 2036. Eventually, this will all come back more ferocious than ever before. And so I'm grateful for Donald Trump. I haven't agreed with everything he's done. And, I've been fairly vocal in expressing some of my disagreements, but I have been very pleased with what he has done. I think he could do some things a little bit better, but other things, like if you look at what he's doing on the climate front, I couldn't have written better climate policies myself. I mean, this guy's taking a chainsaw to the architecture of the man-made global warming scam. And as he himself said, this needs to be one of the top priorities, not just for the MAGA movement, but for the United States. So I would encourage people to pray for the president, to lean on your member of Congress to enshrine some of this stuff into law, but not become, like some of the Democrats are sometimes, or and sometimes Republicans, where just, dear leader can do no wrong. Whatever he says is gospel. We need to look at things on a case-by-case basis, on an issue-by-issue basis. And I hope he'll be able to get some of these things entrenched over the long term. I hope he'll be able to push back some of this. And he has. The question is, will it be sustainable? Right now, I don't think it will be. But if he works really, really hard, and if the American people stand by him on these good policies, maybe we can make some serious progress.
Well, Alex, I appreciate you carving out the time to be on. How can people learn more about you and get in touch?
Thank you. Easiest way, my website is libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org. Sentinel is SENTINEL.org. People can sign up for the free newsletter there. We're on X. It's Alex Newman _JOU. I'm a senior editor at The New American and a fellow at Classical Conversations, so people can check those out. And again, simplest way is just go to my website, libertysentinel.org. And thank you very much for having me on, Christian.
Alex, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Quick ask. Over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.